Today, my guest is AJ Osborne. AJ is an insurance agent. He's a real estate investor focused on self-storage. He's a blogger. He's also active on Bigger Pockets. And he's going to share with us a little bit about a health event that he experienced and the difference between being rich and having wealth. But before we get into that, I want to just remind you, if you like the show, we'd love for you to let us know. You can do this. You can like, you can leave a comment, you can share, and also you can subscribe. Also, if you'd like to see how handsome our guests are, you can check out our YouTube channel, Commercial Real Estate Pro Network, and check out the show there. With that, I'd like to welcome my guest, AJ Osborne, to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CREPN Radio. AJ, welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me on.
Well, I am so looking forward to getting into it today with you. And but before we do, if you could take just a minute and share with the listeners a little bit about your background, and then we'll get into it.
Absolutely. It's interesting talking with a lot of real estate individuals and on a few podcasts and working with people. My background was not in real estate. My background, as you mentioned, was in insurance. I grew up in a very insurance-centric household. My father was a insurance broker up in Idaho, and I was from an early teenager. I would drive around with him doing open enrollment meetings across the state. Which, as you can imagine, for a teenager was extremely boring. But it was always fun being with my dad. And I started straight out of college working with Aflac, and decided that wasn't quite my cup of tea. So I went over to another brokerage firm in the local area, started working with them for a while, and then I went over to my father's brokerage firm and moved my business and started working with him. And we grew that business a lot and did a lot of mergers and acquisitions and built it up. And, it was a wonderful time. I loved it. I loved being with my dad. I loved learning from him. And, he was my mentor, things like that. And, life couldn't have been better. I was making a lot of money. I was selling a lot. I had my own clients, and that's how I made my money. We call it eat what you kill. And so the more I worked, the more I made. And to me, that was great. It was very entrepreneurial. If I wanted to make more money, I'd go out and sell a client. You're kind of your own boss in that situation, which for my personality was perfect. And I had the support that I needed. I had to be successful and learn the trade. And it was great. In fact, I never in a million years would have imagined doing anything else but that, where now that is not really what I do at all. So it was an interesting shift. I moved over and started to leave that world, and I created a new company, and which was primarily built in real estate. And I did that for a few reasons, but I've been building that out for the last 5 years. And thank goodness I did, due to some health issues and things I had. I say it saved my family's financial life, and it did. In fact, probably saved my future. And we made that move, and I did that. I partnered with my father. We were working together and growing his original business. And the things that were great about the business were also the things that were bad about the business. I don't know if that makes sense, but when you're going out and you're selling insurance, I could take it from somebody. And I took the business from a lot of people. I was pretty good at it, and I enjoyed it. I'm competitive by nature, and I enjoy going out there and hunting, very entrepreneurial. But with that same token, I could lose a client at any time. And what had happened is the more I worked, the more money I made. But at some point, you plateau. There's only so much you can work. And, I call it the treadmill, and I was running on a treadmill, and I realized after a while that the only thing different that set me apart from anybody else, even just, what I called the 9 to 5ers, The only difference between them and me was I had, 30 bosses and they had one. And I worked nights and weekends and everything like that. And I made decent money, but I was just running faster on my treadmill than most people were.
Right, right. No, I think the aha moment when you realize a job is a job. I mean, if you're beholden to the customer, or basically, I think what I heard you say was kind of more the time. You recognize that you could
Yep,
make more if you sold more, but there was a plateau that you eventually there was only so much there was so much that you could put in the system and get out of the system as a one man
exactly.
deal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where it really came back. I love business, macroeconomics, things like that. I studied, went to school, and I just couldn't stop reading because I had pretty big ambitions. I wanted to live this great life, financially free, build an empire, all that. And I learned pretty early on through my studies that one of the most important part of that, and Warren Buffett talks about that a lot, is being able to compound your returns. And so I dug in deep and I did a lot of research on capital management. And one of the problems with our business model was fundamentally that I couldn't take my capital that my business was putting out and return that at a known rate of return. So if I took my capital and deployed that to grow the business, I couldn't get that back at a known rate of return. So if I had a manufacturing plant and my manufacturing plant could put out X amount of products, right, based upon X amount of machines, I know that every new machine that I buy, I can put out X amount for a given price. With
Right.
insurance, it just meant I had to run faster. I had to work harder. And at some point you can only do that so much. So I wanted to find a better option, a way that I could compound out my results and my capital and so that I could grow it continually. Also grow it without me working. And the more that I researched it, and the more that I tried to find ways, we did mergers, acquisitions, went out and bought some companies, we hired people, but it just wasn't the same. All it took was one of our big clients to leave, and it set us back years.
Right.
And so there was very little capital management that we could do. So that just wasn't going to be a solution to get me to where I was trying to go.
Right.
Once again, just had to run.
So you have the aha that you're on the treadmill, and you're trying to find a way to get off, or something different. How did you? At what point did you realize real estate was an option?
So one of my driving philosophies that I gained was that there was a difference between being rich and being wealthy. And this was a really core belief that I came to have. And that when working with businesses and businesses owners all over this United States, and when the financial recession happened, as with most of us, that was eye-opening. My, our generations had not seen something like that. It was a long-term debt cycle that had collapsed, and we hadn't seen that since the 40s. And so I learned that some people survived and other people that didn't. And the people that survived were these people that were truly wealthy. And what wealthy meant was that they earned income not dependent on their time. They owned assets, and it was a very differentiator for me. This separation of time and money was something that I did not have. Wealthy people, their revenue came in and made them more money, and they didn't have to work. And rich people, which I'd known a lot of, I knew a lot of business owners that were in service and were in all sorts of different categories. And their income fell and they had nothing. They went bankrupt. They had to give everything back. And at the end of the day, most of the real estate people at the time, that's all they were. They were businesses. They weren't really real estate investors. They were either flipping or they were selling real estate. They were generating an income due to their actions. I would buy up a home, I would put in the work, and then sell that product,
Right.
right? I would
Right.
get paid then for that. There was no residual nature to it, which being from the insurance world, I understood the value of insurance. So the difference between being rich and wealthy really struck home with me. And I knew that no matter how much income I made, I would not be wealthy unless I could separate that from my time. So that's what really kicked us off. And I started looking at all sorts of industries where I believe that wealthy people existed, and they do exist in most industries. It's not what they're doing as much as it is how they're doing it. So how their income is coming into them is the differentiator. Real estate is obviously a big one. For most people in real estate, and particularly real estate owners, it's a passive income that comes in. It's also tax deductible. There's a lot of advantages to it, but two, it's infrastructure. And at the end of the day, my service was a need. A lot of people needed it, but it was also more of a want. Whereas real estate, it's solely a need. You have to have it. People have to have a place to live. People have to, that land always will go up in value. The people that survived the financial crisis, the ones that I had worked with and known, these were people that were getting rental income. They were not people that had any expectations on the valuation of their homes. And so what I tried to do is I wanted to break into real estate, but I had no real experience in the housing. Now, we did own a couple small storage facilities that we had bought. They really didn't make money, which is interesting that that's what I went into. In fact, our first real estate property that we ever bought lost about 20 grand when we sold it. But it was an asset that I looked at that I could apply my skill set in, and that was operating a business and managing capital, and I could deploy it very well. And the strategy was that we would buy underperforming assets, we would increase them, drive valuations, drive rental revenues, and that we could turn around and use that, bring that capital in and deploy it again and do the exact same thing. So my strategy could be deployed over and over and over again, but I would never lose the base that I'd started out. So I would be able to compound my returns. And self-storage lent very well to me. I actually didn't want to be incredibly passive. I wanted to be engaged. And so I'd come up with this plan, and I'd done a lot of research, and I proposed it to my father. I wanted him to be my partner in the deal because I love working with him, and I'll always do that. And two, I wanted wealth to be a generational thing. I want my kids to grow up to be in it. And so that was just a heart of how we work. And he took right away to it. He saw exactly what I thought and, the ideals behind it. And we set out to try to build this up and try to make it work. And we started out and we bought good deals. We were very aware, financially speaking, of how to underwrite things, but we had to really learn the process of how to improve and how to drive those revenues. There was lots of little tricks and things that we learned, particularly underwriting it, how to find undervalued properties based upon their peers in the market. And I guess at first you would say, oh, that's simply based upon the existing market rates. And if there's lower rates, then you could up it. But there was more to it. And that was the fact that not every single facility justified the same amount of rates. So if we went and bought a really poor looking facility, we increased it, and it was in a good location, and we improved the technologies, and we could capitalize on unrealized revenue. That's what I call it. I call it unrealized revenues. And that things like vacant units, right, or lack of collections. So there's occupancy, which I don't like to use the word occupancy because I in fact wrote a big thing on why occupancy doesn't matter. But you would have storage facilities that were 100% full, and they would in fact brag about it. Yet 6% of their units were on some kind of waiting list. They haven't been evicted yet. They were unpaying. Their collection was coming in, and there was this massive bad debt. And then, too, if you're 100% occupied, obviously your rates aren't in line with the market. So we could come in, increase the customer's experience, drive the perceived value to those tenants. We could get rid of all the bad tenants and change our class of tenants that we were bringing in, a higher paying customer, capitalize on that unearned or that unrealized revenue potential, and it would really, really drive those values strongly. Now, this is a hands-on management approach. We weren't flipping by any means, but we would come in, and in some instances, we would drive revenues upwards of 30%. Well, on an asset that's traded at a cap rate, you could have an idea of how much that would really drive those values.
Well, it's huge.
So,
I want to back up here just a second because
yeah.
you introduced the being rich versus wealthy, and we started talking about real estate, and you were talking about how you recognize that the people in the downturn that you noticed that didn't get hurt were the ones that weren't necessarily their income, or it sounded like they were receiving passive income from rentals that was continuing regardless of the economy, and and I think also you also kind of touched a little bit on some of the benefits of real estate and that. But I think what occurred to me is in kind of like your rich versus wealthy kind of thing, is that essentially I think and see if this holds true with you, that the cash flow equals the income, and it's the equity that's building the wealth. Does that kind of, I mean, just from a standpoint of the...
Yeah. So I look at it as a two-part system. Okay. The wealth, actually, I don't look at equity very much, because I don't base my values on equity, nor do I base my ability to live. So essentially I had an interesting meeting with a guy that when I was in my 20s, and I was doing fairly well. Looking back, I didn't realize how well I was doing. But I had met a buddy, and he lived this amazing life. He didn't work. He didn't do really anything. All he did was played. And I was like, geez, this guy must be killing it. He must be making so much money. And I sat down, and we were having a frank conversation one day, and realized he wasn't. In fact, he was making half the income that I was. The difference was how his income was derived. It was separated completely from his time and money. So being wealthy has nothing to do with how much you make. And so some people being wealthy, that may be $50,000 a year, that may be $30,000 a year. But if you can live the life that you want and you don't have to earn an income, you're now wealthy. You are part of a class that doesn't really exist. Some people, that may be $1 million a year, $300,000 a year. I don't know. But if you make $100,000 a year and you never have to work, versus someone that makes $1 million a year, but they work all the time, I started to question myself, well, who really is better off here? And when it came down to it, the person that makes $100,000 a year is infinitely better, because he can always work. He can always go out and make more if he wants to. That's free money for him forever. And that's what wealth was. Wealth was not having to work to make an income.
Gotcha. So it was more about time. It was about your free to,
yes.
Your time was your the amount of time you had to do with as you pleased was kind of the direct correlation to your wealth, I guess.
Yes.
That's what I'm understanding. Got
it.
The
people before the recession, people that survived, the people that I knew, and I worked with businesses, lots of them, over 350. We did lots of consulting. Most of these businesses that were running things, the owners that didn't have to work, their life was virtually unaffected. Their income was stable. There were stable assets. They weren't flipping. They weren't, I was in sales. They weren't doing any of those things to drive the income, and they could never get laid off.
Right.
So they owned their income stream. The income stream was never going to leave, and they didn't have to work for it. Whereas I knew lots of people that made really, really good money. I had friends that made over $400,000+ a year, and they lived in, mansions, and they had all the toys in the world, and anyone else, you would have thought they were a rock star. That all came to end really, really quick. And then once, Warren Buffett says, once you don't know who's swimming without shorts on until the water goes out. That never could be more true. And all of a sudden you looked around and started to see who the people were with real wealth, and they were fine.
Right. No, I think the, the test that we went through, and the crash was clearly generational, and I think it's something that I think will at least for the recent time, and anybody that went through it will clearly be a measuring stick and kind of some sort of a sense of I don't know. I don't want to say weary, but I think there's this sense out there, as opposed to before it. It seemed like there was no end. It was like more debt, no problem. Just get more debt kind of thing.
Yeah.
And when the music stopped, and there wasn't a chair to sit in, and whether it was your shorts, found out that you weren't wearing shorts or whatever that was, that recalibrated everybody's kind of world. And I think that too, the other lesson in that is that the people like you mentioned here that were doing well were in a position that they could take advantage of those, incredibly reduced prices, where the challenges that others were having to liquidate, because of their situation, which made them even that much more powerful or more wealthy and that much stronger. No, that's fascinating. I could talk about it forever. I want to, I guess, back up here just a little bit, because it sounds like, so you were doing the insurance, realized there were some limitations there based on time for money. You have the aha about people with freedom, the time to do as they wish or please. They've got other means that are providing them income that don't require their time. And then you're getting into real estate, and it sounds like you and your father have partnered, and you're doing the self-storage. And
Yes.
So you're buying these, and I think it was before we started the call, you mentioned, or maybe it was when we first started the call, how you'd bought one, and the first one, the end result was a loss. Did I
Yes.
hear that right?
Yep.
So I guess to kind of connect the dots here, you started with one that it sounds like in the end, at least, it was a loss. You continued with it, and it sounds like that's where you're going now. How did you, from that wobbly start, I'll call it, to here? Tell us a little bit. What was the aha in there? That, I mean, you've mentioned you've recognized that you can drive the income, you can buy an underperforming asset. Tell us a little bit about.
So that didn't. So when I started to look at the self storage, when I started to look over at that model,
and when just for reference,
yeah.
about what year was that you were doing? Did you got into the real estate?
2000 and I think it was about 9 and 10.
Okay.
That's when we started to get in. Yes. Okay. And the small facilities that we had bought, that was pre-crash. And so when I started looking post-crash, first of all, we weren't actually financially hurt by the recession. Our business did very, very well. So the aha moment wasn't I lost a lot of income, but it was the aha moment was definitely that was a possibility. And, we were tired. We were tired of working so hard. So when we came out and when I started looking at evaluating other assets, I looked at everything from stock market to all sorts of different real estate assets. It needed to have a merger of two things. It needed to be tangible and create and generate consistent, reliable income. But I also needed to have management. I needed to be able to go in and do active changes to increase the value. Normally speaking, with assets, you can only do two things to increase the value. You can increase the income, or you can make the asset safer. Either way, those two things will drive value. I wanted an in-between. I kind of wanted my cake and eat it too. I didn't like this idea of having a risky asset, maybe like insurance. It could go away at any time, but it was very profitable. And then have a real estate asset that generated very, very low returns, but it was incredibly safe. Well, if it generated returns that couldn't cover my existing lifestyle, that didn't seem to matter much to me. So I needed something in the middle. And for us and what we were good at, that was self-storage. I could go in there, I could rehire employees. We have, I think, 35 employees currently. And so management could play an active role in the performance of those assets, unlike any other real estate asset, because self-storage acts more like a retail center than it does a real estate asset. We have customers coming in every single day. We have tenants, we sell them insurance, we sell them boxes and all sorts of different products. There's different uses for the products. Within my facility, I have, in some cases, 15 different product types. So a 10 by 10, a 20 by 20, drive up, climate controlled, all these different things that I can sell that customer depending on their wants and needs. We sell a lot to businesses that are using it to operate a business out of it. We have in some of our facilities conference rooms that they can use. A lot of them are very heavily technology friendly. We actually bought a bankrupt super Kmart. And
hey AJ, if I could get you just to back up one second, we had just kind of a glitch in the connection there, but you started with the some of them that are technology.
So some of them are a little more technology driven and advanced, and it's separating them out in the marketplace, because in self-storage you do have to have a competitive advantage. Other people are there competing with you. And so we bought a bankrupt super Kmart, and we blew out the side of the walls in this huge super Kmart, and we made basically a road, a drive aisle through the middle, which pull off loading zones that will take you through the whole facility with these big doors that open your gates, lots of entrances and exits, and it's all ran off of your phone.
Wow, that's awesome. And that's probably the best use I've heard yet of these big vacant retail deals. I know in the Midwest where I'm from, that's just amazing, all the number of, prime real estate, big retail malls that have gone dark. So you guys, you bought one, and basically rather than tear it down and reposition it, you basically modified the structure, put some openings in it. What kind of infrastructure did you have to put inside? I mean, I'm thinking of
So inside wasn't much. It was already pretty much gutted.
Okay.
So we did need to install an office. So we had the front corner. So the outside, we had to install gates and everything to get access. The front, we had to build a big office, which we have raised ceilings. It's all glass, very modern. They can walk in, use touch screens to run everything off of. Once again, we think it acts as a real retail asset. And so people coming in, the customer experience in self-storage is very important. And so when that whole remodel had to take place. Besides that, most of it, we had to rip out floorings. We had to make the good drive aisle. An important component we had to put in was the air conditioning system, which we had to run right over the drive aisle so it would suck up the air and filter it out. Obviously, you don't want car fumes in a large box. So we had to do that. The rest of it, though, outside that, it was the installation of the storage units and the metal components that were put into it. And then obviously the drive aisle doors that allowed cars to come in with their phone. They just click their app, the door shoots up, they go through, and the door shoots back down and close because it's all climate controlled. So we had to make sure they shut and open really quickly. And they go up to their unit. They don't even need to click on it. Their unit senses when their phone is near, unlocks, they open it up, get all their stuff, close it, locks back up, they leave and open up all the gates with their phone, come in. You don't even need to go into the store. You can go online on your phone, rent a space, pull up.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yep.
Wow, that's awesome. I mean, and just I love the repurposing the space. I think that was one of the things that always just kind of disturbed me, was knowing the millions of dollars that were spent to build this facility, and that because it was no longer viable in its condition, that so many of them are just being knocked over. And I was going, God, there's got to be some value there. Somebody figure out how to use that. But
and awesome. It's interesting. It's a hard thing to make work because it depends on where it was. Our location was stellar, right off the freeway, very high population density, but more importantly, the competition was extremely low. And we kind of had an edge in the market getting there first and creating a product that most people hadn't seen. But in a lot of the areas, particularly now, areas are really overbuilt, and repurposing a Kmart can be very, very expensive. So in certain markets, the revenue per square foot will never justify that. I'm in Idaho. you just could never make that work because the per square foot revenue are so low. But in higher per square foot revenue markets, it's actually cheaper to do that than build. And that was the case for this market.
Right, right. Now that's again the just knowing the cost per square foot to build and all that. I just keep looking at it and go, God, there's got to be a way to repurpose that, not spend all that money there.
Yes.
So we've talked about some of the factors that appealed to you with the self storage, and the one that I guess that really spoke to me was the ability to drive the revenues. I mean, because you've got these multiple products, and you view it more as a retail store as opposed to quote real estate per se. But I'm assuming that is it not valued? I mean, when you're going to purchase one, do they look at it like any other real estate?
They do. And
okay.
that's actually where we find our edge, because the market views it as a real estate asset, which we don't believe that's how it functions. So that gives us an advantage in the market. So we can go buy something as if they were selling it for a real estate asset at a cap rate, but we overlay our model on top of it, which we know our performance are in our assets and what we can do and how we can change things within that model and drive value. With traditional real estate, not only is it very expensive to repurpose and drive value, if I want to make a house a duplex, for example, well, that's not cheap. I have to fundamentally change that asset.
Right.
And I have to go and get it rezoned. And there's all sorts of complications. But for us, we just had to change more so the assets, but more how we were dealing with the customers. And as an effective management team, we could do that. It's very hands-on. Once again, it's a day-to-day issue, but we employ our employees, their work. We have a great training process that we run them through, and great policies and procedure manuals, and we hold very tight and watch it closely. We can really change that revenue stream and increase it. We see increases everywhere from 20 to 40 cents, a square foot in revenue, and this is in revenue where we're talking somewhere between 50 cents and $1.20 in revenue is, what we're getting. So
wow.
You can imagine how 20, 30 cents would really change that performance of that asset.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. Are you guys, are you focusing on a local area that's near you, or do you guys do this far and wide, or how are you?
We do it far and wide. We care a lot more about the asset that we're purchasing than the location. With that said, we are primarily West Coast is where we're looking, not West Coast, west of the Mississippi is where we're kind of looking in our range. We've been very active. We own 11, over 1 million square feet. And that's across 4 different states. In fact, where we are locally, we aren't looking to buy or expand because the market is so overbuilt and valuations are so high. We believe that we're going to see a huge loss in revenue and occupancy shortly. So we do have blacklisted markets where we've just basically cut out. And where I live, Boise, Idaho, that's one of those markets where we won't do anything in, because it's a lot of these facilities won't be able to make it. Because how they're projecting it. So when a developer comes in, they look at an existing facility street rates, what they are advertising that they're selling. Then they look at a building price per square foot. Well, they take whatever they think they can get and they try to maximize it on a per square foot basis. And that's how they come up with if it'll work or not, right? Not only do we think that this is completely wrong and insane to do, we had a developer that did this, and we bought his from the bank, and then we had to take 40% of the entire facility and reconfigure it because he just did it whatever price per square foot would work, not thinking once again about the customer, and the customer didn't want any of his products.
Right.
So sat empty. And that's what builders are doing. Another problem that you have with that in the self-storage space is street rates does not mean that's what they're getting. In fact, almost always, whatever the street rates are, their revenue that they're achieving from that facility is dramatically lower. So when a developer shows their pro forma to the bank, it said, here's what all the other facilities are charging. Well, that's not actually what they're charging. That's what they're
That's the advertised rate, right?
Exactly.
Right.
And so they're saying at a 90% occupancy, we can make X amount of money, right? Let's say it's $400,000, right? And we'll net $100,000 of that. But with the increased building, most of these in the next 2 years will never hit 90% occupancy at all. And in order to fill up during their fill up time, they're going to have to give concessions, discounted rates, and they'll be far below whatever street rate they are. So a 10% in occupancy differential, along with a 20 to 40% differential in actually charging rate, that's a disaster.
Right.
And that's what we're seeing. And banks are not used to, as we found, really underwriting very well storage facility assets, and builders aren't used to building them. So we're expecting to get a lot of great deals very soon in a lot of different markets. But with that said, that's the great thing about real estate is one market's overbuilt, we just go to one that's not. And there's plenty of opportunities and plenty of markets that self-storage is, really, really good. The problem is, I think when markets are hot, that's where everybody goes, and then other markets are overlooked. A perfect example is Boise was building something like 15 facilities. They're getting 60 cents a square foot in revenue. The average facility is 120,000, square feet at 15 facilities. Let's just call it 10. That's, let's say the average facility has 1,000 units. That's 1.2 million units. There's only 30,000 people that are actually moving in to the area. 10% of the people use self-storage. That's 30,000 people when they're building 1.2 million units. We moved over to another market that's revenue is over $1.20, double the rates of our metropolitan area. No one is building. There is no vacancy in the market at all. We went to buy a 10 by 10. We couldn't find one in the entire city. The population is growing at the exact same rate, and the city size is the exact same, and our building costs are the exact same. No one's going there.
Wow.
So, there's opportunity to be had. You just got to make sure you know the market, know the asset, and where to go. And that's where we moved. We left our markets and are looking out beyond there and going to other markets, which are being extremely successful even at this time. We're getting clever and we're having to do things a little differently, but we're definitely finding success and will continue to. It's just in some of the markets we've had to leave completely.
No, I think that understanding your market, I think that's key to anybody in any real estate investment is if you don't understand the market. And it sounds like you clearly do. I'm curious, just a question about operating in the self-storage space. Turnover-wise, I'm familiar mostly like with residential, whether it be multifamily or single family, that most people are in at least a year. And then maybe more, if you get somebody to stay 2 or 3 years, and they stay with you get the rent increases and you don't have any kind of turn costs, that's a good thing. What kind of turnover do you experience, or what do you expect or budget for with self-storage?
That's all over the board, but turnover is high.
Mm-hmm.
So some months we'll have turnover that is equal to everything that's coming in. And we are actually moving into the slow season of storage, and we will lose occupancy for probably 5-6 straight months.
Okay.
And so every single month it'll be an exodus out. And then we will have come spring in the northern markets, it'll start to go back up where more people will come in than come out. Where people get trapped is they move into overbuilt markets, and then in the springtime, they never get that makeup of losses, and it becomes a trickle-out effect. So the good thing about self-storage is you can change quickly. It's month-to-month contracts. People are always coming in and coming out. You get a lot of churn, a lot of turnover, so you can change your prices and valuations very quickly, increase revenue, and then force appreciation of the asset. The downside is vice versa. That is also true. People are coming in and out. A market can get overbuilt and you can lose it. So as long as the market isn't overbuilt, you can walk in, You can make changes day one. We bought a storage facility from an occupancy that hadn't raised their rates in 10, or from an auction. They hadn't raised the rates in 10 years.
Ka-ching.
Our average rental rate was 60%. Some was 130%. First day we took it over, and that was let me think, 2 years ago to date. And we are now 7 percentage points higher than when we ever bought it. And we lost 15% of occupancy the first day we started it, but we increased revenues by over 40%. And we'd made that all up within 3 months.
Sure. No, it almost seems like the benefit to having space available. I mean, there is something to that, and I guess in the model is to always having some sort of a space available as opposed to, quote, being full. I mean, while you're full, I guess that's a good thing, but I guess if there's always people looking, you want to have space available for them. And if you're pushing your rents, I would think that would make that more, or just even it sounds like there's almost like a season to it. Like you said, the summer months are definitely more of a full.
You're right about having something to sell. Once again, we view it like retail. Well, if you're a Nike store and somebody comes in and says, I'd like to buy a pair of shoes, and you say, we have no shoes, that would be a really, really big problem.
Right.
But in real estate, for some reason, everybody's proud of it, that they have nothing to sell.
Right.
And that puzzles us. But that's a good advantage for us because we can quickly get more room to sell. So.
Got it. Hey, I want to touch real quick, and I don't mean to be quick about it, but I think one of the things that drew me to your story was hearing a little bit about your health event, and kind of I think the beauty of it, and I'd really appreciate if you'd share with the audience a little bit, is how real estate helped you and your family through that. And so if you could take a few minutes and kind of share with us what happened and
this is it's been a big life change. Real quick, I want to touch back when I was talking about the growth in the Boise market in particular. I think I said units and I meant to say square feet, 1.2 million square feet. The real estate, I tell people, and it's true, real estate saved my financial life. And this really drives to me home the difference between being rich and wealthy because it's so personal to me. Looking back upon it, I was working in insurance, and I made good money. And my family, we were rich. With hands or butt, we made very, very good money, and it was a wonderful lifestyle. But I wanted to make that change quite a long time ago into real estate, and it was the best thing I ever did. I'm at almost a year anniversary, but our real estate company, after we kind of had stabilized, profitable, I was still working insurance at the same time. Things were going great. I'd gotten some, I had something triggered called Guillain-Barré. And it's when your autoimmune, it's an autoimmune disorder. So we all kind of have it. Your immune system goes overboard, and it attacks your white blood cells, attacks your nerves. And I had no idea what this was until I contracted it, and it actually took them a long time to figure it out. One night, in fact, I'd been working in the yard and planting trees, and so my legs were hurting, and I'd been sick kind of that week, but I didn't think much of it. Well, that night I got really, really bad, and something was wrong. I went to the ER, and they sent me away and said, "You're perfectly healthy." I went home that night. I got in the tub, soaking my legs at about 3 o'clock in the morning because they were in so much pain. And I went to get out, and I couldn't walk. I was paralyzed. And so I pulled myself out. I yelled at my wife. She came, took me to the hospital. They argued over what was wrong with me for several days. They couldn't figure it out. The head neurologist at the hospital overheard someone talking, came down and said, "Hey, I think this kid's got something called Guillain-Barré, and if it is, we got to get him to the downtown hospital immediately." They ran me down. Shortly after, I began to lose my ability to even breathe, and they my breathing left. They put me under and put tubes down my throat and to breathe for me. And I kept getting worse. They put me into a coma. And when I woke up from the coma, I was paralyzed from head to toe, on life support, eating from tubes, couldn't speak. I couldn't communicate at all. The only way I could communicate with my family was through blinking. And I laid there like that for months. And it's taken a long time to start to recover. I still have leg braces on. I'm still paralyzed below my knees, and but I'm coming back, and I'm doing a lot better. But to say that I couldn't work is an understatement. I couldn't even eat or talk. I couldn't do anything. So I talk about that being on a treadmill, and I lost the ability to work for a wage. I lost my ability to do anything. But because of our real estate company that we built up, I was fine. That revenue was going to come in whether I worked or not. Lying there in the hospital, in fact, when I went into the hospital versus when I got out, my wealth had increased while I was in the hospital doing nothing. And, that, I guess that was a great stress test for my theory on developing wealth. And luckily I was fortunate enough to have that. Very blessed.
No, your story, I just it's so incredible. I mean, thank God you're on your road to recovery, and it sounds like you're making great progress. And I'm sure your family, what they went through with that, has got to be traumatic, and all that, especially. And how many kids do you have?
I have 4. In fact, our baby was 2 months when I went into the hospital. 3 months when I went into the hospital.
And how old was the oldest?
The oldest was 10. So
Okay.
I had 10, 8, 4, and 2 months when I went into the hospital.
Oh my God! Well, hats off to your wife and your kids for.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's quite a story. And I think what really touched me, and it's kind of been a theme of what we've been talking about all along, is that here it was, a guy that was running at warp speed on a treadmill, and all of a sudden he couldn't. I mean, you couldn't run on the treadmill. And had you not had built up this real estate, machine, you would have been, you probably could have lost everything. I'm guessing because for all the time that you were out, I mean, I'm assuming that for a couple of months, your insurance customers might have, heard what was happening and thought, oh God, we love AJ, we won't leave him, kind of thing. But I'm assuming that ability to go out and interact and do what you were doing to make your income, without that real estate, you would have been, up a creek.
Well, and clients, they're absolutely understandable. I had great relationships, but they have to run their business.
Right.
And when it's time to have enrollment and I'm in a wheelchair, they can't say, we're just not going to do business, which is understandable. Sure. They have to move on and live. And 2, for most people, what happens when you move on to disability, particularly like me, long-term disability, your employee relationship by law is terminated. So you can no longer have a job in that case. And then, a lot of the people in these circumstances, they get off. Then once they're finally able to work, if they can find a job, they never fully recover, but their disability does end. And you're right. I could have lost everything.
No, it's an incredible story, and glad that you're on your way to recovery there, and that it's got a happy ending there. So that's great.
Yes, thank you.
AJ, just looking at our conversation today, if there was something, just one thing you wanted to sum up for the listeners, for them to take away from our conversation today, what would that be?
It would be that passive income is a necessity. You will have to stop working at some time. And for most people, Social Security doesn't cut it. And for even people like me, we don't even know if we'll have it. So, it really is, we need to take control over our financial lives. And passive income, it's a necessity.
No, amen to that. AJ, where can the listeners go if they'd like to learn more and connect with you?
I do have a blog. It's called Cash Flow to Freedom. That's where I kind of talk about what's happened. I also put out different articles and things on real estate and how to scale real estate, build up a lot of things that we've done, try to use some case studies, and also try to help people that are just starting out with the different financial models. You can go to cashflowtofreedom.com and my email's there. You can get right on, shoot me an email. I'm happy to respond to anybody.
Got it. Well, AJ, I want to say thanks again for taking the time today. I've enjoyed it, and I've learned a lot, and wish you all the best, and hope we can do it again soon.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right. For our listeners, if you like this episode, you can help us grow. We'd love you to leave a comment, hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe. Remember, the more you know, the more you grow. That's all we've got this week. Until next time, thanks for listening to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CREPN Radio.